Once again, I have two docs up there. A paradox. Might in meekness. Have you known any meek people? Yeah? Can you think of, well, you guys aren't old enough to remember the character in the movies. What was his first name? Casper. You remember him? Casper? Not the ghost. Casper Milquetoast. Remember Casper Milquetoast? If you do, you're older than I thought. But so many times when we think about meekness, we think about doormat, somebody who gets out of other people's way so that they don't offend, they don't cause any trouble. Maybe they don't talk much, never tell you what they really think. Jesus spoke about meekness, but he understood meekness in a whole different way. Actually, very much the opposite of how we might think of it. That in meekness is might, in meekness is power. It comes from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, verse 5 actually, but we're going to listen to the Beatitudes.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye, when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you.
First off, I want to say that there was a little moment there that was so unnecessary. When people persecute you, revile you. We've had that happen, but they didn't beat us up, did they? Not physically. It's words, it's attitude, not physical beating like they just did behind that strange wall. So thank you very much. So many times I think we probably think that Jesus' words were his own. That he brought this new truth to the world. But actually, this is the quotation from Matthew 5:5. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. But it has antecedents that go way back into the Old Testament. If we look back at Psalm 37, verse 11, but the meek shall possess the land. That's the part about inheriting the land. But it doesn't say, blessed are the meek, does it? Notice, the meek shall possess the land and delight themselves in abundant prosperity, because that's what happens. What's abundant prosperity? Abundance of all good, all things necessary for life right here, right where you are. Verse 22 of the same psalm. For those blessed by the Lord shall possess the land. Blessed are the meek. Meek shall possess the land, and those blessed by the Lord are the meek. But those cursed by him shall be cut off. Does God curse people? The answer is no. What happens? Does God cut people off, or do people cut themselves off? When we close our minds to the presence of God, you could say, oh, God cut me off. No, we cut God off. God can only do through you. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. God can only do for you what he can do through you. It's we who place the blocks and then say, God, why? Why did you do this? Why did you? God doesn't. We do. So, Jesus' words come right out of the Old Testament. It's right out of his traditional Jewish childhood, upraising. Remember, he was a good Jewish boy. He didn't come to invent a new religion. What he came to do was to reveal the deep spiritual understanding, the truth in back of his native religion, Judaism. Not a whole new thing. Now, as I said, meek in Jesus' eyes and in the period of the Old Testament is a whole different thing than a weak, retiring figure like Casper Milquetoast. Oh no, very different. The two words that are so important in this passage, blessed are the meek. Meek, of course. For they shall inherit what? The earth. Earth, meek. Those are the two important words in this passage. And what's the earth? It's your environment. It's your body, your affairs, your mental environment, your relationships. It's what's going on in your life. That's your earth. The good that comes, the other experience that comes. And meek, well, in Jesus' language, it's a tough word. Mekheykhey. Together. Mekheykhey. 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 Yeah, can you do that? It's hard to put two gutturals in the same word. Mekheykhey. And that word means yielding, flexible, pliable. In the time I lived in Fort Lauderdale, I went through Hurricane Cleo down there. It was one of those upper high number category hurricanes. Oh man, I saw some amazing things. But I saw some palm trees that were definitely mekheykhey. Bent over. Luckily, someone had taken all the coconuts out of them, because when you have 150 mile an hour winds, you have coconuts flying at 150 miles an hour. We call them cannonballs. Yeah. And my mother and I were my folks had a small motel across the street from the ocean in Fort Lauderdale. And we were in one of the hotel rooms upstairs, second floor. Looked out the window during all this rain and noise and wind, and I watched a washing machine, level with the second floor, flying straight and level right on past. That's windy. Any tree that wasn't mekheykhey, what do you think happened to it? Boom, blown right out of the ground, blown over. We see them around here, do we not? They need to be flexible. They need to be pliable. They need to be yielding. And they survive the things that come to them. Now, Jesus was not meek towards the world. He was not meek towards people. Remember, he got up in their faces and said, "You hypocrites, generation of vipers." He didn't mind telling them how he saw them, you know. He spoke his truth. He was not meek towards people. He could stand in front of Pilate, who was accusing him of a variety of things. And he could stand there in absolute peace without having to scream his defense, make all kinds of noises and say, no, I didn't do that. He was at peace, and he was flexible in the situation. Did not have to defend himself in any way. He was meek toward one thing. He was meek toward God. To be receptive to the presence and power of God. To acknowledge that presence and power. To be open and receptive to the inspiration and guidance of Spirit within him. He knew that when he was open, receptive, flexible, responsive, meek toward God, that God power worked through him. Divine ideas came through him. He could say, "Be ye made whole." Because it wasn't he who was doing the healing. He was acknowledging the presence and power of God flowing through him and through the person seeking the healing, calling that healing forth. He understood how it worked. He was a conductor of infinite divine power and infinite divine ideas that was without resistance. You understand what happens in an electric circuit when you have resistance. When you have wires that can't handle the load, they create too much resistance. They get hot. You can have plugs plugged into outlets. And if there's a heavy current moving through there, more than that can adequately handle, the resistance in that plug, in the interconnection of the plug and the outlet, it can get very hot. Very hot. Perhaps you've seen one or two of those melt. Yes. Resistance. Resistance is a wonderful thing when you're out on the ice and you have resistance between your foot and the ice so that you get some traction. Resistance is also wonderful in your toaster. Remember the old days? I can remember very young, we'd go to a place called Indian Lake, Ohio, and that's before my folks ever discovered going to Florida. So we'd drive, 100 miles north from Cincinnati. And it was a lovely big lake, and it had cottages, and the cottages were furnished, and they had kitchenettes, and they had toasters. The kind that they were shaped like this, and you pulled the side open, put a piece of toast in there, and let the spring close it up, and then you turned it on, and you guessed when it was done, or you waited until it smoked. So you burned it in the toaster and scraped it in the sink. That's how you made toast in those days. Toaster's a wonderful thing. But you don't want that same resistance in your life. That resistance that comes. Well, when you resist some things, sometimes you get sick. Sometimes you get angry. You get hurt. When you're resisting things in life, you get depressed. A whole variety of things we do by resisting what comes at us. Just if you could be that palm tree that just kind of got out of the way, that went with the flow, that let whatever was coming at it pass over it and not knock it to the ground. To be meek is to have a consciousness of the presence of God. To be meek is to be open and receptive to all the divine ideas of God. To be meek is to say, it is not I, but the Father within who performeth the works. If we're not these things, if we do not do these things, if we are not meek to God, then it is the little ego that's running the show. My way. I know how this is supposed to be. I know how I want this to be. When we don't let God work through us and the Spirit move through us, we find ourselves trying to change situations by our actions. We try to manipulate people to get what we need. We work with our hands and our mouths and our feet instead of with our souls in this world. When you are meek as Jesus, all things are possible. Remembering it is God who does the work. It is God who provides you with infinite ideas, infinite possibilities for good. But how many times do you get one of those divine ideas and say, oh, that's interesting, and then drop it, let it go? I can't tell you how many things over my lifetime I have invented, thought of them, even in my head figured out how to do them. Later I saw Ron Popeil sell them on late night television or some other salesman. Great ideas come from God mind to many people at the same time. God seeks to express itself in you and through you, seeks to provide you with all the good you can possibly conceive. But if we're rigid, I had an expression when I was young. Mother, I'd rather do it myself. Well, there have been many times in my life I've said, God, I'd rather do it myself. Well, that's a great idea, God, but I got a better one. I didn't have, and it didn't work. Or if it did, it was nowhere near as good as it might have been. How many times have you had a wonderful idea and just let it go? How many times have you gotten an idea either in your sleep or when you weren't thinking about anything in particular, and all of a sudden the solution to a problem popped into your head, but you didn't do it, and the problem wasn't solved, or it wasn't solved well? To be open, to be receptive. We began with our opening statement. There's no power in conditions, situations, and personalities. God is the only power. There is no power in conditions, situations, and personalities. God is the only power. Together, there's no power in conditions, situations, and personalities. God is the only power. Get that. Make it a firmament, a firm place in your mind. A platform, a foundation on which you can stand. God is the one and only power in you, in your life. No one and no thing is greater than that power. Now, in your bulletin is a much larger affirmation. Chris, would you put that up? Yeah. There's no power in conditions, situations, and personalities. God is the only power. I surrender to God power within me now, knowing that every good and perfect gift comes only from God. Everything I need and desire is brought into visible expression by the perfect power of God at work in my life. I let go and let that perfect power do its perfect work through me now. Let us join in speaking this affirmation together. There is no power in conditions, situations, and personality. God is the only power. I surrender to God power within me now, knowing that every good and perfect gift comes only from God. Everything I need and desire is brought into visible expression by the perfect power of God at work in my life. I let go and let that perfect power do its perfect work through me now. When you let go and let God, God moves through you. It is the power, the intelligence in which you live and move and have your being. Perhaps there are parts of this affirmation that for you stand out. Perhaps you have to take that phrase, I surrender to God power within me. I surrender to God power within me. Or every good and perfect gift comes only from God. Everything I need and desire is brought into visible expression by the perfect power of God at work in my life. And an affirmation that also stands alone. I let go and let the perfect power do its perfect work through me now. mekheykhey. Yielding, flexible, pliable, open, receptive to the inspiration and guidance of that divine mind that knows all, is the fount of all wisdom, and also the source of all power to bring ideas into expression in your life. Be ye meek, yielding, receptive to the infinite power of God in you. Then you truly do inherit the earth. You attract the good which rightly belongs to you. You gain dominion over your life and experiences. Things do not happen to you when you become a conduit through which the power of God flows freely without resistance. God-centered instead of self-centered. You deal with life experiences from the only point of power there is. God power. Instead of from the point of human weakness or darkness or ignorance. You are one with the perfect power, the infinite intelligence that created, sustains, guides, and directs the universe. For this we give thanks in the name and after the nature of the living Christ, God individualized in each one of us. Amen.